Tank battles, missile strikes, drone warfare, street combat. Complete carnage. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has witnessed some of the bloodiest battles since the Second World War. For Putin, the war has not gone according to plan. While Zelensky, backed heavily by NATO and its allies, has emerged as a hero of the Western world. 1 year of brutal warfare and military might. On the 24th of February 2022, Putin announced a special military operation for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine.
Народные республики Донбасса обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. В связи с этим, в соответствии со статьей 51 части 7 Устава ООН, санкции Совета Федерации России и во исполнение ратифицированных Федеральным собранием 22 февраля сего года договоров о дружбе и взаимопомощи с Донецкой Народной Республикой и Луганской Народной Республикой, мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации.
Russian missiles began pounding Ukrainian air defenses, ammunition depots, airfields and bases. Border surveillance cameras captured Russian tanks and other armored vehicles flowing into Ukraine from Belarus in the north, Russia in the east, and occupied Crimea in the south. In the days leading up to the invasion, US officials had warned Ukraine that the capital, Kyiv, could fall within 72 hours. A belief reportedly also shared by Putin's inner circle. But that was not to be. President Zelensky would not surrender or flee. Civilians took up arms, and the defending forces took advantage of the dense forests, narrow roads, winding rivers that favored their guerrilla tactics. Reports say things started to go downhill for the Russians on day one itself, when Russian helicopters assaulted the Hostomel airfield. Hostomel, or the Antonov Airport, an international cargo terminal with a long runway, was a key component of Putin's planned blitzkrieg on Kyiv. Heavily outnumbered, the Ukrainians fought back after initial setbacks and attacked the runway, making it impossible for huge cargo planes to land. Russia's failure to hold the airport meant it could not quickly build up the airborne forces needed to invade the Ukrainian capital. Russian forces then had to fan into nearby suburbs, including Bucha and Irpin. Russia was now held up. Crucially, a 60-kilometer-long Russian resupply convoy ground to a halt north of the capital. Several other factors also played a part in the defense of Kyiv. The weather thawed the land and bogged down Russian vehicles. The Irpin River, a waterway that marked the line of defense on Kyiv's western edge, helped protect the capital when Ukrainian forces released dammed water to flood its banks. The Ukrainians also outwitted the Russians militarily. A Washington Post report reveals that about a week before the invasion, the Ukrainian military had moved all command posts into the field towards the probable access of a Russian advance. General Colonel Alexander Syrsky, who was leading the defense of the capital, moved the army's aviation assets, including helicopters and jets, off major bases, putting them well away from obvious airstrike targets. Two rings of forces were organized to protect the city, one in the outer suburbs and one within the capital. General Syrsky divided the city and the surrounding region into sectors and assigned generals from the military education centers to lead each area. Tactical decisions would be made immediately by officers on the ground without having to consult headquarters. Eventually, the Russians failed to take any territory inside Kyiv's city limits, instead remaining stuck for weeks on the capital's periphery before their retreat. One of the Russian forces' first targets when they launched the invasion was the city of Mariupol. Control of Mariupol would give Russia a land bridge to Crimea and full control of the Sea of Azov, cutting off Ukraine's maritime trade. Mariupol, a port city of some 430,000 people, had come under intense shelling from the initial days of the invasion and soon found itself surrounded. By the 2nd of March 2022, Russian troops were within kilometers of the city on all sides, Deputy Mayor Serhiy Orlov told the BBC. Strikes to infrastructure had cut water and power supplies to parts of the city, and there were also food shortages. On 9th March 2022, a Russian airstrike on a maternity and children's hospital sent shockwaves across the world. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described it as a war crime. A Russian strike on the city's drama theatre, where more than 1,000 civilians were taking shelter, was also globally condemned. Soon, reports of improvised burial sites began to emerge. Satellite images appeared to show over 200 new graves at a cemetery about 20 kilometers west of Mariupol. The town's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, claimed Russian troops were burying civilians to cover up military crimes. Through weeks of intense street fighting and relentless shelling, Russia pushed Ukrainian forces further and further back until they were pinned inside the Azovstal plant. The sprawling complex became home to thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, including fighters from the Azov Battalion, a National Guard unit with links to the far right. On the 21st of April, Russian military officials declared victory in Mariupol after capturing the rest of the city. On the 2nd of May, the long-awaited evacuation of civilians from the steel plant got underway. However, fighting continued until the 17th of May, when it was announced that more than 260 fighters had been evacuated, marking the end of the Ukrainian military operation to defend the site. Mariupol fell, but its defenders were hailed as heroes. The small group of fighters who defended the city for more than 80 days against a Russian force 5 to 8 times larger. Russian forces began capturing parts of Zaporizhzhia Oblast in the early days of the invasion. On the 26th of February, the city of Berdyansk came under Russian control, followed by Russian victory at Melitopol on the 1st of March. Russian forces also laid siege and captured the city of Enerhodar, home to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which came under Russian control on the 4th of March. However, the capital of Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Zaporizhzhia, remains under Ukrainian control. In September, the occupation forces held largely disputed referendums in the occupied areas of Zaporizhzhia Oblast to join the Russian Federation, and on the 27th of September, Russian officials claimed that the referendum was passed, with 93.11% of voters in favor of joining the Russian Federation. However, what has Europe worried is the alleged shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe. Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of shelling the plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency has raised the alarm about shelling around the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, saying it could lead to a nuclear disaster.
Росія не припиняє своїх шантажистських дій на Запорізькій атомній станції і навколо неї. Провокативні обстріли території АЕС продовжуються. Під прикриттям станції окупанти обстрілюють міста і громади поруч. Прямо на об'єктах станції російські військові ховають боєприпаси і техніку. Де-факто станція
Ukraine has accused Russian forces of using the nuclear power plant as a shield from which to fire on nearby cities. Kremlin denies the charge, but satellite photos have shown their military stationed near some of the buildings. Analysts now expect Ukraine to target Zaporizhzhia in its much-anticipated counter-offensive. However, considering the region also houses Europe's largest nuclear power plant, Zelensky's men will have their task cut out to ensure that they oust the Russians without putting the nuclear plant at risk. Russia took control of parts of the Kharkiv oblast right from the outset of its invasion. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city and only 31 miles from the Russian border. However, Ukraine managed to end Russia's 7-month-long occupation of the region during its counter-offensive in September 2022. Ukraine's secret weapon was the element of surprise. Russians were caught off guard by Ukraine's surprise counter-offensive as the Kremlin had redeployed many troops to southern Ukraine for a much-anticipated Ukrainian counter-offensive there. Reports say Ukraine pushed the Russians out from more than 8,000 square kilometers of territory within the space of a few days. On the 8th of September, Ukrainian forces took Balaklia, their first major prize. The counter-offensive picked up speed the following day, with Ukraine liberating 30 settlements and 1,000 square kilometers. On the 10th of September, Ukrainian forces recaptured the western half of Kupiansk and advanced south along the river to reach the outskirts of Izium, which they recaptured the following day. Ukraine recaptured 20 settlements on the 12th of September, re-establishing control as far north as Ternova on the Russian border and as far east as Dvorchina on the west bank of the Oskil River. The Kremlin finally admitted defeat on the 13th of September, but called it a tactical retreat. The Washington, D.C.-based Institute for the Study of War called it the most significant Ukrainian military achievement since winning the Battle of Kyiv in March. Analysts say that the Kharkiv episode proved to the world that an outright Ukrainian victory was possible. However, the battle for the region is far from over. Russia on the 18th of February 2023 claimed to have taken control of a small village near the key city of Kupiansk, and Putin's forces continue to make attempts to retake more areas in the Kharkiv region. On the 2nd of March 2022, Russia said Kherson city was under its control, and by the 15th of March it declared the entire region had been taken. However, a Ukrainian counter-offensive stripped Russia of the only regional capital it had captured since February. For several months before Russia's retreat, Ukraine's western artillery and rockets hammered Russian positions and wrecked bridges across the wide Dnipro River, making it increasingly difficult to supply the thousands of Russians on the western side of the river. The American HIMARS reportedly played a major role in Ukraine being able to liberate Kherson. The HIMARS provided the Ukrainians a range and level of accuracy that they had never had before. Russia's military commander in Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin, announced on the 9th of November that due to the difficulty of supplying forces holding Kherson, troops would withdraw across to the western bank of the Dnipro River. On the 11th of November, Ukrainian troops entered Kherson for the first time since Russia began its occupation of the city in March. The White House hailed what it called an extraordinary victory, while Ukrainian President Zelensky called it a historic day.
Сьогодні історичний день. Ми повертаємо південь нашої країни. Повертаємо Херсон. Станом на зараз наші оборонці на підступах до міста. Залишається ще зовсім трохи і починаємо заходити. Але спеціальні підрозділи вже у місті. Херсонці чекали. Ніколи не відмовлялись від України. Надія на Україну завжди виправдовується і Україна завжди повертає своє. Я щасливий.
Kherson is one of the 4 Ukrainian regions in which Russia staged what it called referendums and formally annexed it on the 30th of September. However, the Russians had to retreat soon after the referendums. Despite the retreat, the Russians have been bombarding the city from across the Dnipro River. The battle for Soledar, a small salt mining town in Ukraine's Donetsk, has been among the bloodiest in the war. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the chief of Russia's private military group Wagner, said the battles were heavy and bloody. The Kremlin also said the Russian advances have come at a high price. The battle for Soledar intensified on the night of the 5th of January, when Wagner forces were first reported to have broken through Ukrainian defenses. In a few days, Russia's Ryba news service reported that Russian forces had encircled Soledar from the northeast. Ukraine's military held out in Soledar against a month-long onslaught of the Russian and Wagner forces. The Russian Defense Ministry announced on the 13th of January that it had taken control of Soledar. While analysts are divided on whether taking Soledar will actually help Russia achieve its larger goal, there is no denying that Soledar, being the first Russian capture of a town since July, will be a major morale booster for the Russian army, which has faced several setbacks in recent months. The fight for Soledar also highlighted the divisions between regular Russian forces and the notorious Russian Wagner paramilitary group. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin accused the Russian Defense Ministry of insulting his fighters and stealing others' achievements. Prigozhin had earlier published a photograph of himself allegedly taken in the salt mines of Soledar, standing next to Wagner fighters. Ukraine also acknowledged that its forces had retreated from the salt mining town. Serhiy Cherevati, a spokesperson for Ukraine's forces in the east, told the Associated Press that the Ukrainian army retreated from Soledar to preserve the lives of the personnel. The eastern region of Bakhmut has witnessed the bloodiest battle of the war so far.
The Russian military and mercenaries have been attacking Bakhmut non-stop since May. They have been attacking it day and night, but Bakhmut stands. Last year, 70,000 people lived there in Bakhmut, in this city, and now only few civilians stay. Every inch of that land is soaked in blood. Roaring guns sound every hour.
While the Bakhmut death toll is unknown, a top Ukrainian military officer claimed in December that between 50 to 100 Russian troops were killed daily in the battle for the city. The city has become an important symbol of Ukraine's resistance. Bakhmut holds, Fortress Bakhmut, have become a national battle cry for Ukrainian soldiers and their supporters. However, recently, statements coming from the Kremlin and even Ukraine seem to suggest that Ukraine's resistance could end soon. Analysts are also divided about the value Bakhmut holds in strategic terms. However, Russia may use the city as a stepping stone towards its goal of capturing the entire Donbas region. As the Russia-Ukraine war completes a year, many experts claim that the biggest battle may be yet to come. Analysts say Ukraine, which has already launched attacks on the strategic Kerch Bridge and the Saki air base in Crimea, may now launch a full-scale offensive to capture the occupied Crimean peninsula. From liberating Kherson and Kharkiv to the Snake Island, Ukraine has dealt some body blows to Russia in the war. Kyiv, with support from the West, has managed to score some decisive victories over the last 1 year. But can Ukraine win the war and outlast Putin's mighty army?